What are the obligations of controllers and processors? First of all, these obligations are related to the principles relating to the processing of personal data under the DPA, conditions for consent, duty to destroy personal data when not required anymore, consent to be obtained for processing personal data for children, the designation of a data protection officer, notification of personal data breaches to his office, ensuring lawfulness of processing of personal data, ensuring appropriate data security and organizational measures, collection of personal data, communication of personal data breach to data subjects, complying with requirements to process special categories of data, keeping records of all processing operations. The principles relating to processing of personal data, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. An employer, for example, can disclose salary details of employees to tax authorities without consent. Purpose limitation, explicit, specified, and legitimate purposes and not processed in a way incompatible with the purposes. For example, a general practitioner cannot disclose patient's details to his wife who owns a travel agency. Data minimization, adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes. Office workers will not be queried about their health conditions compared to a field worker. Accuracy, accurate and, where necessary, up to date. Erasure and rectification without delay. A misdiagnosis of a medical condition is still kept as it is relevant for the treatment given to the patient or for additional health problems. Storage limitation. Storage of personal data, permitting identification of data subjects for no longer than necessary. Deletion of details for staff who have left the organization, for example. Data subjects' rights. Processing must be in accordance with data subjects' rights. Rectification of an incorrect address. Your to-do list. You should review your internal policies and audit procedures. You should be able to update these policies and procedures when necessary to ensure that they are consistent with the revised principles. You should also provide appropriate training to ensure that the business is thinking about data protection issues at all levels. What are the duties of controllers? You should adopt policies and implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to demonstrate compliance for processing of personal data. You should also verify the effectiveness of these measures. These measures also include keeping of documentation as per Section 33, performing data protection impact assessments as per Section 34, complying with the requirements of prior authorization and consultation as per Section 35, designating an officer responsible for data protection as per Section 22(2)(e). Who can be a data protection officer, that is a DPO? It's a mandatory appointment of an officer responsible for data protection compliance issues, as long as there is no conflict of interest with his or her existing professional duties. He needs to have the professional experience and knowledge of data protection laws and practices. He can be an existing employee, a new employee, or an external officer, again, as long as there is a rigorous contract for ensuring appropriate safeguards of confidentiality. What are the roles of the Data Protection Officer? He should be able to inform and advise the controller or processor and their employees about the obligations to comply with the DPA 2017. He should also monitor compliance with the DPA 2017. He should advise on data protection impact assessments requirements. He should be able to train staff, conduct internal audits, and be the point of contact for the Data Protection Office and for individuals whose data are processed. What are the responsibilities of controllers and processors and the DPO? The controller or processor must take responsibility for any non-compliance with the Act. He must also be able to demonstrate compliance regardless of how much autonomy the Data Protection Officer is granted. And he must also determine whether to have a single or different Data Protection Officer for subsidiaries. Collection of personal data. It must be done for a lawful purpose connected with a function or activity of the controller, and the collection of the data must be necessary for that purpose. Let me give you an example of what is a data protection information notification. First, you should identify yourself. Second, you should also notify the collection of personal information. What are the purposes of processing? Where do we collect personal information from? Who do we share our personal information with? How long do we keep your personal information? What are the implications if you choose not to provide your personal information? What automated decisions take place? Which cookies are you using? How do you make a complaint to the Commissioner? How do you withdraw your consent? What is your responsibility to let us know if your personal information is incorrect? What are your rights? How to get a copy of your personal information? Where the transfer of personal data abroad is being effected wherever applicable. You should also see the exceptions that are provided under Section 23, subsection 3. If you have any queries regarding data protection, contact the Data Protection Office for advice.